Welcome to tonight's live video, everyone. I hope you are watching, following, and subscribing because I want you to be able to enjoy this video. My goal for this video is to start a book called Lethal Mountain Pursuits. I haven't read out loud in a very long time, so I'm a little nervous as to how this is going to go, but I would like to welcome everybody to join into the live stream and comment. Tell me what your thoughts are, and tell me if you want to hear more of the books I have in store, because I'm willing to do this for anybody who's willing to listen. Because as a special needs individual, I have absolutely nothing but time on my hands. So, welcome to tonight's live video of a book called Lethal Mountain Pursuit by Christy and read by me. Natalie sat up straight in her bed. Sweat covered her forehead, and her heart pounded in her ears as fear gripped her. What had that noise been? Had the killer hunting her somehow followed her here? Would this be his moment of reckoning? Where he'd finish what he started? He'd almost taken her life 2 months ago. The scar on her jaw throbbed at the remembrance that she'd barely escaped. She ignored the pain, instead listening for any telltale signs that the killer was close. Quiet filled the air. Unmoving shadows cling to the darkness surrounding her. Maybe she'd imagined the thump outside. She'd been dealing with nightmares for months. Perhaps she'd only been dreaming. Even as Natalie willed her racing heart to calm, she knew that wasn't the case. She had come to her sister's little cabin nestled in the heart of the Tennessee woods, surrounded by the Smoky Mountains. So she could hide Lexi had said Natalie could come stay since she'd been having trouble paying the rent anyway. Not many people even knew Natalie had a sister. That made this remote cabin the perfect safe haven, which was exactly what Natalie needed right now. A place where she could disappear, where she could remain buried out of sight from the evil men who wanted nothing more than for her to die. Natalie wasn't even sure why he was obsessed with her. Did the man want to silence her? Did he think she knew too much? Or did he have a vendetta against her? She still didn't know. She only knew she wanted him to leave her alone. But that wasn't going to happen. As soon as this man figured out where Natalie was hiding, she'd be dead. She was certain of it. Her thoughts did nothing to ease her fears, but they were true. She had scars to prove it. Her heart continued thrumming against her chest. Even though she'd been here for 10 days, Natalie had grown to expect the quiet stillness. The cabin was surrounded by acres of uninhabited forest and seemingly endless mountains as the property backed up to a national park. Maybe the wind had knocked over something outside, or a raccoon was rifling through the trash can. Lexi had warned her about that. She let out a breath she had been holding. That was probably it. A raccoon or a bear. No, bears should be hibernating this time of year. She glanced out the window but couldn't see anything. It was too dark out there. At the thought, Natalie's gaze darted toward the clock on the nightstand. It was 4 a.m. She just wanted the sun to hurry up and rise, to expose anything lingering in the darkness. Whatever that noise had been, it had pulled her out of a deep sleep. Natalie sat still, listening. Silence remained, almost mocking her, as she gripped the quilt that covered her. You're probably just imagining things, Natalie murmured to herself as she tried to get control of her thoughts. The reassurance didn't stop her from reaching for the knife she kept in her nightstand. She tucked the 6-inch blade under her pillow before lying down again, reprimanding herself for overreacting. She pulled the quilt to her chin, wishing she could disappear beneath it and escape the entire situation. What happened to the successful, confident person she'd once been? Would she ever regain her life or freedom? Natalie wasn't sure. She hadn't known it was possible for fear to consume her like it did. Her therapist had said she was having panic attacks. Natalie didn't care what they were called. She only knew the terror she felt when they came upon her. No sooner than she had nestled her head into the soft pillow did another noise thud outside. It sounded like a heavy booted footstep on the wooden porch that stretched across in front of the cabin. That was no raccoon. Someone was out there. He was out there. Natalie was certain of it. Trembling overtook her. She couldn't just lie here. Couldn't just wait for the guy to break into the cabin and find her to finish what he started. That's when her thoughts turned to Lexi. She should be home by now, tucked into bed after working the evening shift. If anything happened to her sister because of her, Natalie couldn't finish the thought. She should never have come here. Lexi had her own fair share of problems already. She didn't need Natalie bringing hers. Grabbing the knife again, Natalie slid out of bed. She pulled on some leggings and a sweatshirt before slipping on her boots. Since leaving the hospital after the attack, she'd always slept with him at her bed alongside a packed bag just in case she needed to run. For the past several weeks, her whole life had revolved around her survival. Natalie prayed she was overthinking the situation and that she'd never actually have to utilize the escape plan she often rehearsed in her mind. But clearly she wasn't overthinking. What she hadn't counted on was the real possibility of Lexi becoming collateral damage. In her mind, Natalie had run through several scenarios, but only involving herself and the killer, not Lexi. She had to get her sister out of here before it was too late. Knife in hand, she slid against the wall and as far away from the windows lining the porch as possible. She'd leave the bag for now if she had any. Hopes of escaping with her sister. She would need to be unencumbered. Nothing inside the bag was worth dying for. Natalie crept toward her bedroom door. If she was going to make it, she'd have to slip into Lexi's room, wake her up, and then take her through the living room, into the kitchen, and out the back door. She had no time to waste, but Natalie took another step. A shadow crossed the window. Her lungs froze. The outline of a man appeared, first at one window, then another. The guy was trying to peer inside, wasn't he? Natalie sank into the shadows, praying he didn't see her. She didn't dare make a sound. But he must have seen the SUV outside. He had to know she was here. Had he seen Lexi come home? No telling how long he'd been out there watching the place. Was he waiting her out? Did he know she and Lexi had nowhere to go and no one around to help him? The nearest and only neighbor was a quarter-mile away, and Lexi had warned her to stay away from the man. She said he was trouble, more trouble than was the last thing that Natalie needed. She remained frozen until the man finally stepped away and his silhouette disappeared. His boots again clunked against the rickety wood of the front porch. Then she heard the doorknob rattle. Her breath caught. He was at the front door, trying to get inside. Not even trying to be quiet about it, as if he already knew he had the upper hand. Despair threatened to overtake her. Natalie couldn't let him get close enough to finish what he'd started. She had to get Lexi and get out of here. Her pulse continued to ramp up with every second that passed. She grabbed a jacket from behind the door and pulled it on. She always kept a flashlight in the pocket there. Then she grabbed her cell phone, which usually didn't have enough service out here, stepped into the hallway and headed toward Lexi's room. Lexi, Natalie called in a harsh tone. "We have to go. Careful not to trip over the clothes strewn across Lexi's messy floor." She made her way to the bed and flipped on her flashlight. She sucked in a breath. Lexi's bed was empty. Natalie rolled around. "Lexi!" Next, she checked the bathroom. It was also empty. Lexi wasn't home unless she didn't know whether to be relieved or more frightened. But Natalie couldn't allow fear to immobilize her. She had to get out of here now. From where Natalie stood, she barely saw the outline of the man's head in the small glass pane atop the front door. A curtain covered it. He couldn't see inside, but she'd seen enough. The man rattled the door again, this time more insistently. Then a thud sounded as he tried to kick in the door. It had a deadbolt, but she doubted the frame would withstand the pressure. As panic raced through her veins, Natalie crept toward the back of the house. She slipped through the kitchen, through the back door, pausing to make sure the man was still at the front door. She listened when she heard the doorknob rattle again. She lifted a prayer for courage and protection and darted outside toward the vast expanse of dotted tree mountains surrounding her. Suddenly her seclusion felt like an enemy instead of a friend. She flung herself down the wooden steps, cringing with each creak that sounded in the woods. As soon as her feet hit the grass, she began sprinting, running as if fire chased her. She still gripped the knife, clutching it in her hand and praying she didn't stumble and cause her own demise. Behind her, someone yelled, Hey, stop right there. The man, he'd seen her. Madly fought through panic and continued to run toward the trees. A few more steps and she'd be in the forest if she made it in time, because footsteps pounded behind her, destroying everything in their path and threatening to soon destroy her. Andrew Moore held onto his dog's leash as the two of them took a nighttime walk. But it was the middle of the night, but Andrew was an insomniac when Rambo, his 3-year-old Newfoundland, had begun barking at him. He'd given up trying to sleep. The dog didn't usually do that unless he had a good reason. So Andrew had gotten dressed and headed out. The nighttime air in the Smoky Mountains was cool and crisp, as always in the winter. There was no snow right now, but only 2 weeks ago they had gotten several inches. He loved it out here, loved the mountains, the hiking, the solitude. Out in these mountains, his biggest worries were bears, snakes, and overzealous tourists. This time of year, all 3 were scarce. Being here beat his old life in Nashville by far. In Nashville, he'd worked his way up from a patrol officer to homicides. Rambo had faithfully been by his side for 3 years, and Andrew had often called the dog his right-hand man. Together, they'd solved uncountable crimes. But the good the 2 of them had done together suddenly meant nothing, all because of lies someone had told about Andrew, lies that demolished his reputation. Rocky Cove, Tennessee was the place where he come to recover after his life in Nashville had been upended. That was what Andrew told himself when he moved here. He just needed a fresh start. He had even enough money to sustain him for a couple more months until he figured out his next plan of action. One thing was for certain, from here on out, he wanted to do life alone. He thought he had his future planned out, with the woman of his dreams by his side, but she'd stabbed him in the back. The betrayal cut deep, and the wound was permanently embedded in his heart. It was just as well he had all he needed. Right here, as Rumble sniffed around, a sound suddenly cut through the air. It sounded like a man's voice calling out. He squinted. As his muscles tensed. Only one person lived nearby, a woman named Lexi, who had a cabin a quarter of a mile from his. As far as he knew, she lived there alone. When Andrew had gone to introduce himself after she moved in a month and a half ago, the 30-something woman had been standoffish. It had seemed more than being standoffish, and he'd than being standoffish. However, the woman's eyes had been glazed, and he'd smelled alcohol on her breath, and her speech had been slurred. Not wanting to get involved, he hadn't gone back since. But just last week, he noticed a woman driving an expensive SUV past his house. Since the road ended near his neighbor's cabin, the only person who normally came past his place was Lexi. If she had a boyfriend, he hadn't seen the guy, so who had been yelling from that direction? It certainly wasn't Lexi or the other woman. The voice was too deep. He hadn't seen the new woman bring anyone else over there either. Andrew had seen her leave and return only once, one other time. From the glimpse he had gotten of her, he guessed she was probably in her late 20s, early 30s. She had dark hair that fell past her shoulders in waves, and she looked like Lexi, only more civilized. Either way, she didn't seem the type who'd want to live in a place like this, especially not with that fancy SUV she drove. Rather, he pictured her more the urban type, with his cops instincts. He usually had a good read on people Andrew would be lying if he said the woman said he wasn't curious about her, but both of the women actually, but he minded his own business. He didn't want people to ask questions about him, so he didn't ask about others either. The law of reciprocity only in a potential negative sense, he is supposed. His muscles tensed as another shout reverberated through the woods. It sounded closer and had definitely come from a man. His law enforcement instincts kicked into gear. Let's go make sure everything is okay, he told Rambo. Rambo seemed to agree because the dog pulled him in the direction of the noise. They cut through the patch of woods that separated the two properties. A large plot of land stretched between them, all thick forest, dotted with boulders and imposing rocks. Right now, it was winter. The trees were barren and dried leaves covered most of the sloped ground. The skeletal branches made it easier to see, but the leaves made the forest floor slippery. Andrew paused as he heard footsteps moving quickly in his direction, and then he heard a cry, a woman's cry. His lungs tightened. Someone was running through these woods in the dark. Something was wrong. He was certain of it. He picked up his pace as he headed toward his neighbor's cabin. He continued to weave between trees, around rocks, and through ravines. As he got closer to the sounds, Rambo pulled harder at the leash. He reached the top of the ridge, and a feminine figure appeared from around the boulder and collided with his chest. Something flung from her hand. A knife, he realized. Andrew sucked in a breath. The woman gasped as she looked up, her dark hair wild and covering half of her face. Panicked. Eyes met his as she pushed herself away. She nearly toppled to the ground in the process. Andrew called her before she could fall. but as soon as he grasped her arm, she flinched. Even more panic seemed to set in. She wrenched her wrist out of his grasp and staggered backward. This time she did fall. She landed on her palms. But if she was hurt, she didn't let it faze her. Her gaze landed on Rambo. She let out a strangled cry and scooted backward. Once out of reach of the dog, she glanced behind her as if to expect someone to be there. She kept glancing back and forth as if she were trapped. Andrew peered into the darkness behind her. No one was there. He sucked in a breath before asking, "Are you okay?" He studied the woman cautiously, unsure what she might do next, but he knew fear when he saw it. The woman was terrified. Andrew would need to proceed carefully. He didn't want to frighten her any more than she already was. Then there was the knife. Thankfully, it had fallen out of her reach. But he reminded himself the woman could still be dangerous. As Rambo barked and crept closer, the woman let out another gasp. Her eyes widened as she stared at the canine. She scrambled back farther. Her face turned sheer white. She was terrified of dogs, wasn't she? "Heel, boy," Andrew ordered. "Heel." Rambo faithfully sat beside him, just as he'd been trained. "He won't hurt you," Andrew assured her. But the woman didn't seem any less afraid. Instead, she rubbed her wrist, and Andrew wondered if she had a spring. As the woman glanced over her shoulder again, Andrew heard a stick crack in the distance. She was being chased, wasn't she? The man was after her. That was why she'd had the knife. Just then, Rambo growled, "The person who caused her to run must be close." Andrew braced himself for whatever would happen next. Alright, everybody. Thanks for joining for Chapter 1. If you would like, follow and subscribe to this video, I would very much appreciate it, because that took a lot for me to read, and I'm willing to read more. But I definitely need you to like, follow, subscribe, and share this video. to anyone you know, please and thank you.